What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we are going to be continuing the Yamaha FX build. If you guys didn't see the first video, basically we show you how to get a free jet ski, and we show you how to make a boatload of cash by simply doing a couple different things. I suggest you go and watch that video if you haven't already, but while you're here, you might as well watch what we got going on. Now, to finish this build, which we plan on doing in this episode, we have to put a throttle cable on, we have to do all the electrical, and to top it off, we got to do body work before we even bring it to the lake to see how she does. Stick around, let's see how it performs. Alright guys, and to give you an update, I've got the sheet metal. It is now Monday. The place is open, so I went and picked up what I could pick up. Unfortunately, nobody can seem to get stainless steel right now, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's okay. We'll use steel and just paint it real well. Should be perfectly fine. But let me show you kind of what I had to do. So keep in mind that I'm backwards now, but the shaft is pulled this way an inch, right, from what the original was. And so we kind of had to line everything up. And essentially what I had to do is I had to take this side here and actually cut it down about 3/8 of an inch and on an angle so these things would sit flat. You can kind of get an idea between my crappy welds and what actually is happening there. But so that's that side, and then this side needed an extra 1/4 inch thick pieces of steel to pull it upward to get this whole thing to shift. And as you'll see, if the camera's showing it right, this is a perfectly straight angle. So what I got to do now, I'm going to go ahead and get the holes drilled for the engine to actually get mounted, because we'll still have to use shims to get it perfect. But I have to do some temporary welds to weld this drive shaft into our mid shaft, because the only other way to do it is to buy a $400 another Yamaha drive shaft, and I'm not doing that. I don't care about a mid shaft. I can pick those up for $100. So we're going to weld that one, but I need to get some shims to make sure it's perfectly straight. Then once that happens, we'll weld, and then there'll be a little more permanency to this motor inside this hull. Alright, so moving forward, once again, my welds aren't perfect, but we got a pretty good round. I'm going to try to do this one-handed while I hold this. You can see I got a little bit of shake because I'm holding it with one hand in my elbow, but it actually is almost perfectly smooth, especially at higher RPMs, as you can see. So we did a really good job keeping it smooth. That's really what mattered. Now it's time to put it back in. Alright guys, so a bit of an update. Right now, we got everything bolted in and aligned, and I can tell you that everything is turning over pretty darn good and straight, and not to where I did spray a little WD-40 in the cylinders so they're not dry. I've been pretty lucky so far. I haven't had to buy any hardware. Everything is just simply bolted in. So it's time to move forward. We got a lot of different things to bolt up. We got the exhaust to deal with. We have electrical to deal with, the intake to deal with. So there's a lot of other stuff to bolt up. Let's move forward. Okay, and so moving forward, I decided to work on the cooling lines, and basically the way those work is, if you can see that splitter right there, that is how the water comes in, and it splits two different ways, this way and this way. If it continues this way, it runs into the head, in which it runs down through into the exhaust and into the stinger and back down, and then it has an exit that runs from this out to the back of the ski. The side over here that comes in runs in, and it goes into the lower part right here of the exhaust, and then tees off up into the pisser out the side over there. Now, I did have 3 pissers in the front of this, probably because, I don't know, I guess it pushed a lot of water. And so this one here and another one that is hanging down here is going to connect to each other and just be blocked off. They are not needed. Now, it still has the OEM bilge built in, and then it has an electric bilge. None of that stuff back here was touched, so that is still all original. And I think that should be sufficient to get this thing cooled off, or at least cool enough. Alright guys, so moving forward, I just installed our 2-stroke oil tank, and essentially what I used was a 2-liter coolant catch can. This works kind of nice because the factory gauges in the Sea-Doo actually used an oil light to tell you when the oil was low, and I don't think that I can make the oil pressure light in a 4-stroke work with that. And so the next best thing was using a coolant catch can that would allow us, or overflow can, that would allow us to see an actual visual representation of how much oil is in it. Now, there was one line that runs from this down to our actual rotary valve, and then there's another line that runs from the tank to the rotary gear. Now, I will show you one thing. If you can see, and it's going to be hard to see here, but if you can see that, it's almost impossible to see here, there is a hose clamp that goes to that thing down on the back side underneath the exhaust. I will tell you that it is a lot easier to put that on prior to putting on the exhaust, so don't be like me, that wasn't fun. I got that all done. That said, we're going to move forward. I'm going to show you what I had to do to finish this exhaust, and then we're moving forward to either carbs or electronics. Okay guys, and moving on to finishing the exhaust, the only thing that I really needed to do with the exhaust is connect the stinger to the actual water box itself. Now, you can clearly see that the exit pipe of a stinger of a 2-stroke is about 2 inches, whereas the inlet pipe for a 4-stroke is about 4, or exactly 4 at that. And what I need to do is find an adapter to go from one to the other. Now, what you'll see here is an adapter or a coupler. What do you know? Now, I picked this up at local Home Depot, and I thought, Googling it, this is a perfect fitment. It's a 2 to 4 inch, no brainer. Well, unfortunately, like most things at home supply stores, just like a 2x4 that's not really 2x4, it's like 1.5 by like 3.5. This wasn't 2 to 4, it was 2 1/8 to 4 1/4, which is kind of goofy. I don't understand the home building process, but whatever, don't really care. So what I had to do to get that to fit was the same thing you'll see on our mid pipe that's going in right here. Essentially, I had to take a piece of a coupler and cut it down. You can kind of see the separation there. I went ahead and put silicone around the insides of that, or engine sealant, and it's clamped down for 24 hours. Once that's done, this thing will slide into here like you see right here, just as though I did in this side, and actually does a really good cut. The only key here is you want to make sure the area that's cut, you put on the top side, because you don't want, even though it's sealed, you don't want the water, which will be on the bottom, connecting to that. Now, this piece here, where did I get this? If you look at the picture above, that's where this thing came from. I cut this out. This is actually aluminum, and because I didn't have any exact 2-inch aluminum or stainless steel piping, I decided to utilize what I had already, which is kind of what we're doing with this build, and try not to spend any money. It's almost a perfect fitment. Again, it's going to go into here, and then I have a piece of the original pipe, or original hosing, that came from the same Sea-Doo right here that we're going to cut to fit. So I'll do that right now, and I'll show you exactly how that turns out. Alright, and there you guys have it. There is the completion of the exhaust. Now, overall, it fit almost perfect. You will see that there's a little bit of gap here. That's okay because the pipe comes all the way out there. We got plenty of bite. The only reason it's like that because of the angle that the tube is at. I could have forced this to go farther over, but there was really no necessary need because, again, we've got plenty of bite for that to hold on to. I don't think we'll have any problems out of that. Let's go ahead and move forward. Oh, also, guys, before I forget, I did want to point out one thing. I did forget to put the rubber coupling right here that goes between this and this. Typically, that's to keep the drive shaft lubed when it's inside the main crankshaft here, because what happens is when you don't do that, that's when you start hearing a lot of that rattling that you always hear from Sea-Doos. It's because people didn't grease their greaser right here. I'm going to eventually probably have to take the motor back out, probably for refitment, stuff like that. I assume that's going to happen, so I'll put it on there when that happens. But for now and for testing purposes, when we go to originally put this on the water, if I get there without having to take the engine off, this has the shroud that goes over top of it that will stop any grease from coming out anyways. But I did want to point that out. I didn't forget that. Well, I did, but I did notice afterwards. Alright, so moving forward, we are going to make a different battery fit in this ski. A lot of you guys know that the batteries that go in these skis or any power sports are ridiculously expensive, and a lot of times what I'll do to kind of offset that cost is put a lawnmower battery in them. And if you look at the picture that I have attached here, what you'll see is that on the bottom side, that is the typical Sea-Doo 4Tech battery at around 150 so odd dollars. It's 385 cold cranking amps, and above it you'll see a typical lawnmower battery, and you can see the price on that, and those are right around 340 to 370 cold cranking amps. Huge price difference. So moving forward, how do we do that? Because the batteries that typically come in these skis are fairly small. I think it's a size 12. We are going to make an adapter plate. I went ahead and 3D printed this thing. There will be a link in that description below for that. But all we really have to do is just shave off the front part of this right here, and then you'll see the plate will bolt essentially right down inside there with 4 rivets, and then you'll be able to access the original screw holes to bolt it right back in, and you'll have the flanges to strap it down. So it should work pretty good. We're going to try it now. I did use cheap filament, whatever I had left. That's why it's multiple colors. So again, this project's supposed to be as little cost as possible. It cost me roughly like $4 in plastic, and that was old scraps that I had. So let's move forward, get this thing in. I'll show you what it looks like. Alright, so there you go, fully installed. One thing to note, I did go ahead and use some hot glue to hold in the hooks right here, as well as there's 2 spacers on the bottom sides of this that I glued to the bottom of this, so you wouldn't have to mess with trying to get to them because it's kind of difficult. It just made sense. So everything's in there now good, it's nice and tight, it's got good strength, and so as we move forward, we'll throw the battery in, and I don't think we'll have a problem with that at all. And so moving forward, it's the next day. I'm going to go ahead and throw on the carbs. I have to do some modification to get things to work, obviously. And so what I've done is I've obviously taken off the right control, the original that had all the buttons on it because we weren't going to use them. And I used an old XLT 1200 Waverunner throttle assembly right here. It actually fits perfect. I did have a Kawasaki one too, and it's actually the same thing if you look at the lever. They're exactly the same. The difference was this wasn't as bulky. The reason I chose the more bulky one because the original was bulky, and I thought with the cowl being here, this would kind of match up a little better, and that's the reason I chose that. Now, as far as throttle cable, I was going to use the XLT one. I thought it might be a little short. I wasn't sure, so I went ahead and used a Kawasaki one that I had off an Ultra 250. It is almost perfect. It's a little bit long as far as gap pitch. You can see that I have it adjusted all the way out here. And while you can't tell, it's adjusted all the way out here. And at full throttle, it gives it about 95% opening. So it's going to work. I don't know if the Yamaha one would be better, but for now we're going to use this one because I know it's got plenty of length. And so that said, we're going to go ahead and throw these things on. I got to wire the this wire here to the oiler down there, which is right down in the front. And then everything should bolt right to, and we'll start hooking up some of the fuel line. So there is our carb all hooked up. The only thing I'm missing right now is a choke cable. I don't know what I'm going to do with that yet. Again, I had to cut it off to get it out. So I'm kind of have to make my own anyways. So I'll come up with something there. But for now, everything else is hooked up. I'm not going to put the breather on yet because obviously we want to get it running first to make sure everything's kosher before we go start throwing all the covers on it. So time to move forward. Alright guys, so moving forward, the first thing I want to do is I want to get the choke cable on this thing. Now this particular choke cable is off a Sea-Doo GTX. It should be plenty long. In fact, it looks extremely long, so I don't know what I'm going to do with all that length, but I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be short, and I needed to know that the length right here was going to work with the carburetor that we had. So being that it came off a twin 717, I'm pretty sure the carbs are similar. That should work just fine. I got to figure out exactly where I'm going to mount the pull at, and then I got to get it run just to the center of this carb right here. So let's get into it. Okay guys, so what I think I've settled on right now is using the gauge bezel. You'll see on the right hand side here, which actually was right there, they had some what would be buttons. This ski doesn't have those options for whatever reason. Now I want to go ahead and drill through here. It's a little bit tougher because the circle is going to be kind of hard, and I don't really want to have to 3D print something here. I should be able to cover that enough that it'll look halfway decent. And then essentially the choke cable goes through here, down, and then back to where it belongs. So let me drill this thing out. Let's see how clean we can make it. Alright, and so there you have it installed. I think it looks pretty darn clean. Okay, and so moving forward to electrical, it's time to get our mounted box installed right now. And the first thing we're going to do is take that, and we are going to install this mount right here, about like that right there. So let me get that screwed in, and we'll move forward from there. Alright, so moving forward, what I'm doing right now is I'm going through all the manuals, both for the Yamaha and for the Sea-Doo, looking at the wire harnesses, and I'm marking all the wiring harnesses from the ski and from the engine setup, so I can get them all basically intertwined and worked together. Now, most of the harness on the ski is in the front, coming out of the gauge cluster, so I've got all that marked. Now I just officially marked all the stuff from the Sea-Doo, and essentially what I have to do now is make some wire harness extensions so I can get everything plugged in together. Alright, so we ran into our first snag. And actually, before I even say that, look how quick nothing can turn into a total mess. And I ain't even got nothing done yet. Anyways, the first snag that we run into is Sea-Doo has to be a pain in the butt and always be different from everybody else. So most people's kill switches on anything, on your lawnmower, or pretty much anything in the world, when you want to kill something, it kills it by grounding out the ignition, which is essentially what this is. You press the button, or the lanyard comes off, and it grounds out, and it shuts the vehicle or the ski off. In Sea-Doo's case, Sea-Doo didn't want to do that. They want the total polar opposite. They want connection, and then you break ground to shut it off. It makes absolutely no sense. So I have to, well, basically I can't use these control switches, which is kind of angering me. And I don't think there's really any way to make those work, at least that I know how. So what I've done now is I'm going to have to utilize the original kill switch and get a Sea-Doo lanyard, which is fine. We're probably going to mount it like in this area here somewhere. And then because my button looks like poo-poo and I don't feel like buying a new cap for it, I have some momentary push button switches. You'll see right here, we'll basically mount for our starter switch right there. So we'll have our lanyard and our start button right there. It's out of the way. It's not as cool as being on the handlebars, but I guess I have to work with what I got. Just another kind of reminder why I would much rather have a Kawasaki or a Yamaha engine in this thing. Anyways, time to move forward. I'll keep working on it. Okay guys, so moving forward, I went ahead and got some of the wiring done just for the starter and the lanyard. So basically you can see that I'm using wireproof connections. And I also have a wireproof two-prong plugs, so if I ever wanted to disconnect this, I could do that. And essentially what I'll be doing is I'll be running a complete wired loom all the way down there, up, and then it's going to be running to our lanyard where you'll see I have marked here, and then our starter switch. Now, I can't do that yet because we have body work to do on this, a little bit of paint, but I will be doing that, so just know that it's running and ready to go for that. Again, I have the lanyard here and I have a push button start. So if I'm smart now though, before I do anything else, I'm going to get this thing started running. Because if I wire all this stuff and switch things around and end up having a problem because of that, I won't know if it's because of that really, or it's because the ski had a problem prior. So I haven't had it running yet. The smart thing to do would be to do that. So I think before I do anything from this point, I'm going to get the new battery installed down there, get all the terminals connected on there, because right now we're just getting a clicking out of the solenoid. So I'm thinking that either I have a bad connection or that solenoid could be no good. So I want to make sure that I replace that if that is the scenario. So you know what I'm going to do. Okay guys, so one thing I want to show you, I don't want to go through a lot of this wiring stuff with you, but I do want to show you one basic thing. I know from a long time ago that with CDs, when you press the start button, it would give the power on the dash like a small amount of time to have power, even if it wasn't started, so you could see like the hours or whatever it is, how much oil is in it, or whatever the case was, depending on the ski itself. What I figured out here is there's a 3-wire plug that actually went to the tach, and essentially you have power on this line and power on this line right here, and this is a ground. The weird thing is it is a timed power, and it actually is the ground that is the timed switch. So if you see that I have no volts right now, I'll go ahead and hit the start button, and you'll see it's got 11 some odd volts, and it's been about five seconds and it's done. So our ground wires are switched wire, and the reason I'm showing you this is because for you guys to illuminate, let's say if you're doing this, a dash up on the board right there, and it's not the original dash, you're going to need to run power from this to the power wires on this dash, which if I remember correctly are these 2 wires right here, this black and this red. So keep that in mind. Just want to show you. I'm not going to go again a lot of wiring details. I'm just going to show you the basics so you guys can understand what you need to do if you do this. Okay, and just to test that theory, I went ahead and got my wire hooked up to my starter switch. I have a wire going from the 2 wires here, the red and the black, coming from the tach switch to the red and black wires going to our gauge cluster. You'll see it right there with no power on right now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit the start button. You'll see it just cycled, and there it's on. We'll give it 3, 4, and 5. It's off. Okay guys, moving forward, it is time to let you guys know that the wiring is complete. I went ahead and finished everything I needed to do to get this thing working, and let me show you exactly kind of what that was. Now you will see that the main loom is actually running from the box here up and through with quick disconnects all the way up to our components that we needed to do. We got our brand new conversion battery in the back right here. As you see, it fits absolutely perfect, so that's good there. The one thing I wasn't happy with was using that little switch right here for the starter switch. The more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? I don't want to be stuck out in the water and this thing get a little bit damp and stop working, and then have to do some kind of MacGyver crap and rip wires out and not try to get it explode and whatever else. So I decided to move forward and use this switch. Now what I did was I got this set up as start, as you would imagine, and I'm actually using the kill switch as the bilge because we're going to have a lanyard anyways. It doesn't really matter for the kill. Again, as I told you, that the C2 is opposite of the Yamaha. So what I'm having to do, there's a spring that actually holds this piece downward that disconnects it. I went ahead and took that out and glued this together, and so now that's out, and it is a fully working start button now. So everything is good to go there. You'll see that our gauges are working as well. So everything is wired like it should be. I didn't start it yet, and the reason why is I actually got a little bit of oil leak down there. I don't know where it came from. I got to pull the carbs off and see where that leaked out. Hopefully it's nothing serious, and I can get it thrown back together, and we'll get this fired. The reason I didn't fire it up is I didn't want to start it without you guys seeing its very first start. So let's move forward and figure out what the problem is. All right, so understanding I did something correctly, I'm going to go ahead now and figure out exactly where this oil leak is coming from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull off the carbs. I need to make sure that the oil pump is connected correctly and see if I can gather where the leak is coming from. If I can figure that out, we're going to throw in about 5 gallons of gas and a little bit more oil in it. We're going to let it run right off the tank. Okay, so as of right now, the highest area of oil is down here on basically the mounting plate. I can't feel underneath the motor to find any real oil. I'm guessing, because there's really nowhere to come from the case, I'm guessing that it's possible that it's coming from somewhere inside the rotary cover here, even though I can't detect exactly where that is. And so the way I'm going to figure this out, because there's 2 different areas it could come from, the biggest problematic would be the actual brass rotary gear inside the motor, and that's what actually is fed through this right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the carbs back on, and I am going to take a a vice grip, and I'm going to pinch off this line right here that supplies the actual oil injection system, which means that the oil will only be able to flow through to that brass gear. And if we still leak after cleaning it out, then I know it's a bigger problem. It's coming from that brass gear. If not, then we know it has something to do with the oil system. So it's going to take a little while, but I'll show you what I find out. Alright guys, so I kind of screwed up and I see exactly what I did. So if you look at the drawing right here, this is the motor, this is the oil injection system, and this is the rotary disc that goes right here. This right here is where the oil's leaking out, and it just so happens I didn't put a hose on it. And so the way it is supposed to work is that it is a feed line that comes from the bottom here into that rotary gear and then back out, and it resupplies it to the top of the tank. Now the way I have it set up right now, it's coming from the bottom of the tank and going to this one, so that's wrong, and then obviously this one's wide open. Not good. So what I gotta do, real simple, just take the tube that's going from here, run it to here, and then run a return to the top from this side right here. Easy fix. So without further ado, it's time to get this thing to fire over. And what I did was I went ahead and took some crazy premix, very oily, just to be safe. I sprayed some in the cylinders now, but we're going to go ahead and spray some down the carbs. We just want to see basically if this thing's going to fire. And, well, we're going to find out right now. Well, that's what we needed to hear. We're on the right track. Alright, hoses are all been replaced and are in the correct position now, finally. It's time to start this thing up. Now, I don't think I'm going to necessarily throw any gas in the tank just yet, because I got to make sure that the oilers are working, and that the oil is getting pumped through the little lines that you see down in the bottom there. I want to go ahead and put both lines inside a small tank with premix in it, just to be safe, because I don't want to run this thing with no oil. And then once we get everything running okay, and I can tell that the pumps are working, or the oil pump's working correctly, we'll go ahead and fill this tank up like it's supposed to. Alright guys, so it's finally time. We're going to try to fire this thing up on its own. I'm going to try to not use any spray in the carbs at first. And if you can see right there is our miniature gas tank, which is simply nothing but a peppercini cup. It's got both the pickup tube and the return tube in it for the fuel. So I got the key on now. I'm going to go ahead and pull the choke. We're going to hit start and we're going to see what this thing does. That is absolutely perfect so far. It worked like a charm. I'm super happy that thing's running like it should. It's time to move forward. We're not going to lake test it just yet, but it's time to get into the body work. Alright, so moving into body, we got a lot of different things that we need to do, including putting in our rub rails, replacing and doing something with our rear bumpers. We need to install the front bumpers here. We have mirrors to basically work on, and I tell you what, I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint those to match the engine to kind of tie everything in, and from what I can tell from you guys, that's your favorite part is the paint, so we'll get that done. Then we're going to replace the mats with all new matting, getting a little bit better looking, clean up these stickers, and get this thing on the lake. So moving forward, we're going to stick on our rub rails. Now I will say that the actual rails that the rub rails go inside aren't in great shape at all. You can see they're kind of tore up a little bit. Unfortunately, I can't find any of these. I don't know if Yamaha's just not selling them anymore, but I know probably a lot of the parts dismantlers aren't really stocking those because that's something that maybe doesn't sell all the time and it's super big, so it's hard to ship. But nonetheless, we're going to stick these in. Real simple. It's just sliding it in from the front till it stops in the back. That should be easy as it sounds. Alright, so rub rails are on. That wasn't that bad, but I will tell you, you better go ahead and spray some WD-40 all the way down the channel here so it slides in. Second side, super easy. The first side, I sprayed a little bit in the starting, and boy, I'm going to tell you, there was a lot of close calls to the skin of my knuckles because of that, so I wouldn't not do that. Make sure you put in plenty of WD-40. You're probably going to have a mess just like I made here. That's okay, we can clean it up, but at least you got the rub rails on without killing your knuckles. That said, it's time to move forward. We need to get these front bumpers on right here. Alright, and with the front bumpers now on, it's time to move forward and get ourselves some new mats. Alright, now I got what I believe is a really nice looking matching mat, if you see it right there. And what we want to do right now is remove all this matting here. Now, I could save myself a lot of headache without having to redraw everything if I can keep these in one piece. So my plan is to try to use this scraper here and just kind of lift up on it as I scrape underneath it to at least get the top half complete. That way I could simply just lay it on top of the new padding right here and trace it out and cut it out with a razor blade. So surprisingly enough, that actually worked. I'm not really sure how, but it did. So let me go ahead and get the rest of them off. Yeah, so that was fun. I got all that off. I still have to do some final scraping to smooth it out. You can see all the pads are in one piece though, or the pieces they're supposed to be in anyhow. So I'll go ahead and finish scraping all this, get this cleaned off. I might have to rubber wheel it to get the rest of the stickiness off. I don't know, we'll see. And then what'll happen is, again, we're going to trace those out onto the new turf and put it on. Okay guys, so the turf is finally done. We did have two snags, and I want to share with you exactly what that was. Now, you'll notice, and maybe you didn't notice originally, but these diamonds are going that way, and the diamonds on this part are going this way. The reason for that was because that the pad wasn't wide enough to get this sideways, nor if I was to turn these sideways to match would it get wide enough. So I actually had to split them two different ways. Now again, you probably wouldn't notice had I not pointed that out, but that's what I do, I gotta be honest. So I really like the way they turned out. I love the colors, it matches the ski perfectly. Two problems though. So that was problem number one. Problem number two, which you might not notice, there's some scratching here and you wonder why. If you look at where the little markers are where the original turf went, it's quite a bit shorter. And the reason for that is because after I took off the original mats, they shrunk almost immediately, and I didn't even realize it. I've never seen that before. And so I cut these out right underneath the original mats, thinking it was perfect. I did the 3 on this side and 3 on the other side, and then I realized how much they had shrunk, at least a ½ inch all the way around. Fortunately, at that point, I realized it, and I was able to make up for that on this back piece here and these two kickers right here. But I was not real happy that that did happen. But overall, for a free jet ski, I think right now it's looking pretty darn good. We have minimal dollars into this thing, and I think it's time to move forward and do the next part. One more thing I want to add before I give up on this turf is some heel guards. And when the driver basically sits on this thing, his or her ankles will sit right about there. I'm going to put some small pads there because it'll fill in that void, but it'll also help your ankles from knocking against this thing. It's really kind of a nice additive. I did a build on Aquatrax a while back, and unfortunately I don't think I ever did any videos on it because it really wasn't a build, it was just design. But it was a full wrap, and the whole back was HydroTurf and Black Diamond HydroTurf. Down the sides, up the sides, everything. It looked amazing, but what ended up happening was, with it parked outside, the turf on the side was able to let mice climb up the side here and get into it and nest inside that. Generally, if you keep them locked up, they can't do that with a cover, but this pretty much just gave them a ladder to get right in, and I found that they were coming in literally right here underneath the seat of it. So what I want to make sure is that I keep it somewhat shorter because I don't want them to get to this edge. I don't know if it'll stop them, but it's just something to keep in mind. If you guys keep yours outside near a shed or something where there are mice, that is a potential problem. Okay, and so moving forward, one of the problems I want to address is these rear bumpers, or gunwallies, or gunwales, I don't know how you say that. But they are super faded, and you can see I kind of scratch it and the oxidation comes off. The problem is that I paid $80 for that piece of junk, and a new one was like $150. I would have rather bought the new one, but I know at the end of the day, well, it's going to do the same thing. And I'm wondering if I use a heat gun, if I can get the life back out of that. Otherwise, I'm going to have to paint it. Let's check it out. And heat gun's rolling. Let's put a little heat on her, see what she does in the same spot. Looks like it might work. I think it'll actually work, guys. Look at that. It looks brand new after that. Well, I don't know if I'd say brand new, but pretty darn good. I'm gonna hit this whole thing, I'll see what it looks like, and we'll determine if it's gonna need paint or if this will work. So it's not terrible, but it's not perfect either. So here's where I have to kind of make a decision. This could obviously change in the future once I pull out the paint. But the thing to keep in mind is, while it's not perfect, it is a bumper, and the color it is right there actually does match, for the most part, the rub rail, so I kind of got to keep that in mind, because otherwise I'd be painting it black or green or whatever the color is going to be. And the real problem is that if I do back up into something, or this actually is used as a bumper and gets scratched like it has before, that paint's going to be chipped off, and it's going to look a lot worse than just the gray with a little bit of ugliness in it. So that's something I kind of think about. I think for right now I'm going to stick with it just like this, but again, once paint comes, that very well could change. Okay guys, so as you expected, I am not going to keep these this way. They look terrible. I just can't do it. It just so happens that I have this right here, and I've probably had this for, God, 20 years. It's about 3/4 full. This is from back when the Avalanche and the Ford Explorer Sport Track, with all the cladding, would fade. They came up with this paint to basically to match that, so it should be a really, really good match, assuming that it's still any good. It feels like it is, so I'm gonna try to spray it and see what happens. Alright guys, I gotta say I'm very impressed with this. I can't believe, for paint being over 20 years old, that it just looks impeccable. So I mean, obviously everything isn't perfect, but the color tone is perfect. Obviously some scratches that I didn't fill in or any of that. Again, not necessary. I just wanted to look at least one color and match the rest of it, and it does now. So I'm going to throw these on, and I think the only other thing we have to do is throw on the handlebar pad, and then we're going to hit the lake. Alright guys, so we got the rear gun walls on and the upper handlebar pad on. From what I can tell, the ski is finished, and because it was kind of a lengthy episode, we're going to call that a wrap for now. Make sure to tune in next Friday to see the finale and see us go on the water. I'm kind of excited. We're going to find out whether this thing was a total win or a complete failure and a waste of time. With that said, I hope you guys like the content. Click that thumbs up, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe and that bell notification so you get notification right when the next video comes out. I'll see you in the next one.